Hello YouTube, I'm News Center Maine meteorologist Jason Nappy, and as you can see, talking about winter 2023 and 2024. A lot of factors and variables go into that forecast. I want to give you my best, most educated guess as we start winter into the next few days here in Maine. Facebook is best place to get me, but there's also Instagram, and we do a little bit on YouTube. All the pizza and ice cream lovers there, thanks for being there. Let's get right into things. So we've got to talk about last year first. And the last really 3 winters have been the La Nina fashion. So that's that cool water here, equatorial Pacific. Fly up home now to the U.S. You got that polar jet coming down, cool to the northwest, the high plains, Midwest, wet here, Ohio Valley, warm for the southeast, the Gulf Coast, the deep south, right? That's what the pattern was the last 3 winters. Here's what's going to happen typically during an El Nino, and it will be an El Nino. That we do know. Warm Pacific Northwest up to the high plains, polar jet kind of goes a little bit north, dry here, Ohio Valley, back towards Tennessee Valley, and then here's the key to this whole thing. It's that subtropical jet really gets cranking, okay, because you have that warmer equatorial Pacific, you get more lift, more thunderstorms. So the big question on everyone's mind, now that you know it's going to be an El Nino, will it be more towards the neutral or the strong El Nino? Because that matters, right? It's the details here. You know, we're talking about splitting hairs, but really, I'm going to break it down as simple as I can. So if it goes more neutral or closer to that, it's more of a colder and snowier solution. I'll tell you why in a minute. Stronger El Nino is more of rain at the coast and snow inland. And I'm going to explain the storm tracks here, just briefly talk about this. A neutral or weak El Nino in the past has meant really big time snows. A lot of nor'easters, subtropical jet, and places as far south as New Jersey, Philadelphia, South Jersey, seeing some big time storms in those neutral or weak El Ninos. The stronger El Ninos, you get that storm track a little bit more inland, and you get a little bit more rain and mixing going on, some bigger snows over into the mountains. So let's just pick a few spots here. How about Portland, Maine? That's where obviously one of the places that we cover here. Also cover the whole state of Maine, part of New Hampshire. The number 1 on record biggest snowstorm was 31, almost 32 inches. That's February 8th to 9th, 2013. That was a neutral period of the El Nino, or Southern Oscillation. Okay. How about this? The number 4, fourth biggest, 23, almost 24, 23 and change, January storm, end of January 2015. That's our most recent big one. That was a neutral, more of the weaker kind of the version of the El Nino. So how does this kind of factor up here for Maine and New Hampshire? Well, you see here Western Mountains, Northern Highlands, and North Woods, Caribou, for example, 108. That's the average annual snowfall. It doesn't matter if it's a La Nina or an El Nino. That's what all kind of averages out the last 30 years or so. Bangor around 66, and Portland, which is not far from that as far as number-wise, but you know, a good couple hours or so as far as driving, 61.9. So how does this all factor in? Well, Caribou was in a weak El Nino to a La Nina year. They got their number 1 snowiest year, not storm, but year. Obviously, it'd be way too much for a storm. 197.8. That's number 1 all time, 2007. Okay, so let's talk about the National Weather Service. They've got obviously their stuff they put out every year, and with an El Nino look, seasonal temperature outlook, pretty classic here. Pacific Northwest is above average probability, around 40-50% or so. Same thing, the UP of Michigan, heading up to Wisconsin, and also here in New England and the Northeast, above average temperatures. The probability is there. So what does that translate to in Maine? What's typical, right? Typical high temperature, Portland 35 and change, Bangor 31 and change. Obviously this is below freezing, that's above freezing. That's typical. Now, if we go to the low temperature in the teens, and let me get out of the way here, typical average temperature. Now, if you take a couple degrees and add it to these, then obviously you're going to have less snow, especially in a place like Portland, depending on what happens with those storm tracks. So precip-wise, another factor here, and typical, the National Weather Service is going to go and feature this strong subtropical jet here. And notice here this curve along the southeast, Georgia, Carolina, and that's the Miller A storm track. Okay, right there. It's going to have some Miller B's coming across too, but you get the idea. So you see, maybe you're starting to see where I'm going with this in the forecast. One more slide or two I'm going to get to before I get there, because we're getting into November very soon. And if you're watching this in November, it's still valid. First inch of snow typically on average on the ground. Caribou, November 8th. I expect us to get that a little early this year in Caribou for the kind of pre-holiday week, Halloween weekend. Bangor, the 21st, and then if we get closer to the Thanksgiving time frame, Augusta, Portland, around then, typically the first inch of snow. That's on the ground. That's snow depth. Okay. Well, let's talk about my forecast here. This is what I'm going to boil all that down. Now, there's many more factors, but here's where I'm going to boil it down to. I don't have numbers on here because it's just darn near impossible to say, but I will get to the numbers in just a second. But really, I'm just going to go plenty of nor'easters. Now, I have some color coding here. So southern coast, just outside of Sanford, so about in Kennebunk, West Kennebunk, south and east. A little mixing going on there with the green. Over towards the mid-coast, Penobscot Bay region, Blue Hill, Bar Harbor, Machias, Eastport. Then you go inland from that, get a good helping of the nor'easters, the northwest side, the deformation zone setting up. And then over here, obviously, the White Mountains of New Hampshire, the western mountains of Maine, a little gap here up in Greenville in the Boundary Plateau, and then back here up around Lake Millinocket, you're going to have Millinocket Lake, excuse me. And then over here, you're going to have, or Katahdin, you're going to have a lot more snow. You got obviously the high peaks there. So let's talk about one kind of thing to go back and look at with the analogs with this. And this is a look back at the 2009 year of winter, 2009, 2010. This is what happened. This is not a forecast. This is what actually happened back then. You can see here the entire U.S. Well, I don't even have good eyesight, so I certainly can't see that. So I zoomed in for you so we can look at this a little closer here as far as feet and inches go, okay, for snow that happened that year. And that year is going to be a lot similar, very similar to this year with the analogs lining up for this type of El Nino. Not a strong one, not necessarily a super weak one, kind of in between. So what you're seeing here in the western mountains, over towards the White Mountains, northern highlands, and then you see that gap here close to the Boundary Plateau, heading south of that to the down east region and the southern coast here. So you're seeing why I made the map I did, but we're somewhere in that 3 to 4 foot range here, and then obviously more. You're getting up around 10 or so up in the western mountains on top of Katahdin, for example. So you get the idea. That's my comparison there. That's how we look at the past to trying to predict the future. So I hope you enjoyed this. Maybe you got some information out of it. Maybe you'll drop a follow. I got more stuff coming this winter. I'll be tracking all the storms. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll stop by, talk about the pizza or the ice cream. We do that too. We have a lot of fun on the social media. So I thank you so much for joining and for watching. Once again, News Center, Maine, meteorologist Jason Nappy. I love snow, love predicting snow, playing in snow and driving in snow. It kind of depends on the day, right? But thanks for joining along. Leave a comment if you like about what you think, or join the discussion on the pages here, what you think this winter is going to be like as we get into a new winter here in northern New England.